All right, so let's see. Now our people service has the ability to return the groups of people that we can display. The next thing I want to do is add a menu to this application so we can select what group we want to see. So let's go. Where do we want that? I want to see the icon to bring up the menu beside the title of the application. That's a pretty standard place for it. So to do that, we're going to start by navigating to our home page. So under Home, HTML, there we go. So here's the HTML for the home page. And before the title, we want to put a button, right? I want to make this an Ion button, so it's properly formatted for Ionic. And in it, I want to put an icon, and I'm going to use an Ion icon. Okay, so Ion icon is, a built-in class. They've got a ton of icons that you can use. So I'm going to say the name is menu. And the coolest thing about this, well, aside from the fact that you get a lot of stuff for free, these great icons, they've also styled them slightly different for Android and for iOS. So you get to see an icon that kind of looks proper for your platform in a lot of cases. And that looks like about what I wanted. So now we have a button that doesn't do anything, but it does have those 3 lines that I wanted. Let's make this do something. So we want this to toggle the menu that we haven't written yet, but we want it to toggle a menu. Now I always forget, is it menu toggle or toggle menu? I think the attribute I'm looking for is called menu toggle. And I'm just going to save that. And if I got this right, actually our icon's going to disappear. Oops! I need the menu toggle not on the icon. I need it on the button. Okay, if I got it right. Right, so if I got it right, it's actually going to disappear. And yay, I got it right. So it's gone. And here's why that's important. Menu toggle does 2 things. One, it means that when you click on this button, it's going to toggle the menu. So it'll either open it or close it. But the other thing is that it hides the button if this isn't the currently active page. Does that make sense? So we need to let the navigation system know. We need to plumb this into the navigation system. So now I'm going to go over to our app level component. So source app.html, and we'll add that plumbing for a menu. So we're adding a menu. Let's go Ion menu, sounds right. And a menu will have content. So I think that's Ion content. Right. And what do we want in here? We want a list. So Ion list. And I'll just start with one item. So we're going to have one item in this list. So I'll say Ion item. And we'll call this my first menu. Right. Okay, so we've just added the menu, the list of things into our system. It consists of one item, but we haven't actually hooked it up. We haven't made our application aware of this particular menu, etc., etc. So let's tie these 2 things together. So we go to the Ion nav, and we need to get the DOM element for this. And a way to do that is by going pound, and we just create some variable names. So I'm going to call this my app. Okay, so we now have a variable called my app. We have access to a variable called my app that is this DOM element. So now I'm going to go into Ion menu, and I think it's square bracket content equals, and then we need to pass in the name of the DOM element we just created, so my app. So if memory serves, that should tie those 2 things together. So let's see if our menu shows up, and it does. And if we click on it, my first menu. not too bad. So a couple things to note. First of all, you can actually drag out the menu. You know, if you didn't want this to be, you know, if you wanted the menu to be a little more subtle, you know, don't need an icon here. You could just, you could hook it up without the need for an icon. But the way we did it right now, I'll just go back to localhost. Thank you. The way we've done it so far, there's that icon. All right, thank you. Let's continue on by, let's add those groups next, okay? Thank you. All right, so now let's add the plumbing in so that we can iterate through all the available groups and have a separate menu item for each one. So to do that, let's go to the app component that corresponds to this HTML. And we're going to inject our people service. So that's people SVC, and that's called, we call that people provider. And thankfully Visual Studio Code automatically imported this for me, so if you don't have that tool, you might want to import it yourself. Next, when the application has kind of initialized a little bit, and that's what this callback is for, then we want to reach out and get that list of people. So we're going to call the people service, and we're going to go get those groups. Get group names, that's what we want. And let's assign that to a variable called groups. Okay, and we're just going to say groups equals that. Right. Now this dot groups. Nice. Now if I want to be a little more specific, I can actually annotate this, say that this is an observable. I actually like this. Some people say you're crazy for adding this where you don't need to, but if you declare what the type is, then the editor is able to catch more of your errors for you. You know, there's nicer tooling if you annotate those types. So that's exactly what I've done. I've said group. Groups is an observable of string array. And of course what that means is it's asynchronous, where eventually we make that call, it returns right away, and it's like a promise that returns one or more string arrays. And we happen to know it'll return a single string array. So let's continue on. We're going to go to our app.html, and we want a separate ion item for each of those things. So yeah, let's do that. So now we want to use that list of groups and use them as menu items. So let's continue on that. So the first thing I need to do is navigate over to app.component, which is the component corresponding to this HTML. And I want to inject our people provider. So I'll say, actually people service is what I like to call it, because it is a service. And the type is people provider. And a cool thing just happened. It not only did it autocomplete, but it also auto-imported for me. You'll need to do that yourself if your editor doesn't do that. Next thing, after the platform has initialized, we want to call out to that service and say, hey, could you give us the list of available groups? And then I'll make those available. So to do that, we call our people service. And we say get group names. Look at that auto-completion. Love it. Okay, so we just got the group names. And now I'm going to assign that to a member variable. So we're going to call this groups. And we're going to say this.groups equals that. Awesome. So groups will get updated automatically. Now I'm going to do something optional. You don't need to do it, but I like doing it. I'm going to actually annotate the type. I know that this is an observable of string array, meaning You know, it's something we're observing, and eventually will give us back an array of strings. Okay? Like I said, that's optional. It gives us better, it gives the editor better telemetry in case of an error, and I make those a lot. So let's go into app.html, and now as we iterate over our list, well, we want to iterate over a list, and we want to show all those group names. So let's go into our item, and we're going to go star ng4 equals, and I'm just going to say let group in groups. So I'm trying to iterate over all the groups and assign each one to a variable called group. But groups isn't actually an array, it's an observable of array, so I need to subscribe to it. And I can do that either in my app.component, but this time I'm just going to put it right here. I'm going to pipe it through async. And this is a nice pipe that causes us to actually subscribe to the variable here. So the async pipe causes us to subscribe to groups. And when that data comes in, it's available to this let clause. Does that make sense? To this for clause, I should say. And then finally, I'm going to, in here, we're going to say, hey, just show the group. Now, I see we have some kind of a red line here, but I think Visual Studio Code's just a little confused. I think everything's actually working, so we're just going to take our time and see. Because over here, we can see it did actually transpile and build. Do a little waiting. If this takes too long, I'll speed up the video. It's web packing, and the magic is starting. So what we're expecting to see is once I click on that menu, I'm hoping to see the two names of the two groups we've defined. By the way, this computer we're running on isn't exactly a beast. It's, yeah, and in some ways that's a good thing. By using a slow computer, you find your performance problems early. Oh, come on! So, how's it coming? Just load our application. I'm going to bring up the development tools. Ah, something's wrong here. Okay. Very interesting. So I did get something wrong. It's definitely with my for statement. Oh! You know what? Even though I've wasted your time, and I apologize, I'm going to leave this long video in here because this is so annoying. Yeah, I can see the problem now, and it's really subtle. And half of you are saying, Rob, you are so stupid. Why didn't you see this? I used the wrong word here. It's not in, it's of. So yeah, what that's all about is an Angular. When you want to iterate, using Angular, you should be using that of word. In other languages like C#, for example, you would use in. Good. Okay, so now we go over here and we see our two menus. Nice. Okay. So like I said, I apologize for that taking a while. Other things I wanted to mention, well, we already did this. We saw the menus popping in and out before, so that's good stuff. So I guess the next thing we want to do is when you click on one of those menu items, I would expect that if I click on the bears, I see the bears. So let's do that next. Now let's do the simple part of hooking up this menu. Let's actually add a click handler. And one other thing while I'm thinking about it, it's not obvious that these are groups. So I could have a main heading, it says, groups, or I could just put like a groups icon there. Now, I like the idea of simple. So we'll start simple. We can always change it later if we want. Simple meaning put the icon there. So here's what I'm going to do. Let's go to the HTML for our menu. That's over in, actually I'm going to pop this up, it's a little easier for me to navigate, app.html, and very simple menu. We know when we're iterating groups, this is a group of the groups. So let's do this. First of all, we know these are going to have to become buttons. So I'm going to change this to Ion item. Yes, we're going to change this to Ion items that contain buttons. So I'm going to say button, right? We still want that group name in there. And we also want one of those nice Ion icons. So I'll just set my indenting correctly here so we can kind of see what's going on. And so in this button, before the group name, we're going to show an Ion icon. I almost called it a button. Ion icon. And the name is, I think the one we want is people. Like I said, they have a nice website. You can look this stuff up. Just save that and let's see how this feels. Now, not bad. I don't like the look. I think we can change that by making these an Ion item. And another thing we want to do is we want to, if someone clicks on the button, not only do we want to have a click handler, but we want to close the menu, and we can do that with the menu close attribute. So now when we click on the side menu, I haven't added the click handler yet, but we'll add that in a moment. That looks better. Okay, that's good enough for me for now. And this is the kind of thing where we might want to run the emulator so that we can see how it'll look on both platforms. Yes. So next thing we want to do is add a click handler. So I think everyone's familiar with this. Click equals, and so we wanted to call a certain function. Let's call it set group, and we're going to pass into it the current group. Okay, so we haven't written this function yet, but we're going to. Let's go over to our app component, and now, so this is the constructor, we'll put it down here. We're going to create something called set group, and it takes a group, which is a string. And for starters, let's just console log this out. I'll say set group, and also log out what the group is that we're setting. Okay, let's go back to our app and bring up the developer tools window so that we can see the console log. Okay, there's our console log. So I'm just running a little test here. And now, if I select the bears, it says set group the bears. And similarly enchanted. Okay, good. So we have a menu, and it's doing something when we click it, and the data is being passed through. That's not too bad. So in the next video, I'll actually change the plumbing so that we actually load the appropriate group when we select it. Thank you. Okay, so let's see. Our application, we now have the ability to have the menu select a group. Now we want to update our home page with data from that group. So we got two groups, we want to be able to switch between them. First thing we need to do is, well, let's see how the home page currently gets populated with data. We'll go to the home page. We'll go to the TypeScript file for the controller, and we can see here that we currently just hardcode enchanted is the group. So let's try to pass this in. And the way to pass data into a page that's created from our application level component is to use navigation parameters. So let's do that. Let's inject a class called navparams so that we can get access to the navigation parameters. So I'll say private and navparams, and this is navparams. Okay, and let's import this. I never know if it's going to auto import or not. That was pretty simple though. So we now have this navparams class, and in Ion view did load. We're now going to ask it the question. We're going to say, hey navparams, can you get me something that got passed in? So I could call this group. Let's call it group. Okay, we're going to call it group. I'll assign this to a variable called group, and we're going to pass that in here. Group. Okay, so now when this view loads, it's going to look for a navigation parameter called group, and it's going to use that when it calls get people. And we're not actually passing this in yet, so let's pass in the group. So who creates the home page? That would be our app component. And let's look at the TypeScript file for app component. And this is our top level component. And being the top level component is actually just a tiny bit different than the other components. There is a nav object associated with the Ion nav component. So let's take a look at the HTML for a second. Here you can see Ion nav, and we want access to that navigation component. So I'm going to go into app component, and I'm going to, let me go one more time to the HTML. We call this my app, so that was the DOM object. So back to app component, I want access to that child. So I'm going to say in here ampersand view child, and I'm looking for a child called my app, and I'm going to assign that to a variable called nav, and I happen to know it's of type nav. Where navs actually, it's going to complain about this in a moment, I think. Nav would be something in Angular, in Ionic. So I'll just import that right there. Right, so I now have a nav component that I can access. And what I'm going to do is, at this point right here, let's just hard code it first. I'm going to say this.nav, and we're going to set the root component. Now I just want to point something out. Usually when we use nav, it's a navigation component. We use it to change to a new page, and we would do a push. In other words, we want to change that new page with the idea that we can go back a page. But in this case, we just want to go directly, we want to set our home page. So I'm going to say set root instead. And it's just like push, except it doesn't remember where it came from. It's saying this is the root component. There's no stack of other pages that we visited yet. So set root, and what do I need to pass it? I think I need to pass my, we probably need to say I need to go to the home page, Here's home page. And I want to pass the navigation parameters to it. So let's see, we created a member called group. So I'm going to pass a group to it. And just to be different, let's say the group is the bears. Previously it was enchanted, now it's the bears. So fingers crossed. Let's see if this works. Oh, I missed something here. View child, of course. View child is just like component. It's something that we bring in from Angular core. So I'll just bring that in right there. And let's see if we've got everything. Currently says view child is undefined, but actually there's a bit of a race going here. Oh, I've got lots of things wrong. So first of all, I see home page is declared twice. I think it automatically now it's oh, look at that, many times. Okay, we only need one definition for home page. So I'm going to do that one, and this one confused it, so I'll just save that. Let's take a look at the other messages, see if there's something else important. Doesn't look like it. So I think that should be it. If this worked, our application starts up, and now when we set our root component, it will set the navigation parameters so that the group is set to the bears. Webpack still going. Time for a drum roll. I won't do a drum roll. And it worked. It finally worked. Okay, thank you very much. Yes, that's good for this part. We'll move on. Okay, let's see. So now we're passing in the group that we're interested in seeing. Let's get rid of this hard-coded string. So at the moment we have an observable being returned. We called get group names, and it returns an observable that returns the array of groups. Let's subscribe to it so that when that array of groups comes back, we can actually use the first one. So to do that, this is an observable. We're just going to get rid of this. We're not going to assign the groups like that. Instead, this observable, we're going to subscribe to it. And when you subscribe to an observable, you actually get the data back. So groups is what we get back. And now we're going to call a couple things. So I'm going to create curly braces here so that we can execute an entire statement. The first thing we want to do is we want to say this dot groups equals the groups that we got back. Okay, so the groups that came back, we're just assigning it to a member variable. The next thing we want to do is the set root. And now we don't want to do the bears, we want to go to the groups, and we just want to grab the first one. So that might come close to doing the trick. But I do know this, we changed what groups is. It's now an array of strings. It's not an observable of strings. So we're going to get rid of this word observable. And similarly, we're going to go into the HTML for this. So let's just navigate to apps.html. And since it's no longer an observable, we can just iterate right over groups. We don't need that async. It'll cause nothing but grief for us. So in summary, now let's go back to app.component. We subscribed to the groups, and when the groups came back, we simply did an assignment, and now we pass in that first group. So let's see, we're just waiting for TypeScript to catch up with us, and we'll just see what happens. So in theory, we should see the first group, and the first group that we defined was actually enchanted, so I'm expecting when we're done building here that the list will regenerate and it will say enchanted. And pretty close. We didn't quite get through the compilation phase. We have this unused import. So TypeScript, as you can see, can be picky. So let's go back to this. We no longer need to import observables, so we can just get rid of that, and we'll do a save. And the reason why we don't need to bring in the observable class is we're no longer, it's just not needed. Finally, so it appears to be working. We subscribed to those group names, and when they came back, we took the first one and we said, hey, that's what you're using. So that's a step closer. And now, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. Let's move on to the next step. And we're really close now. So let's go back to our menu, which is an app.html. And we've already got set group. And so I think all we need to do to get this all working is go to our set group implementation, which is over here, and make it also do something like this. So I'm just going to copy our set root, and I'm going to copy it down here. Okay, so if set group gets called, whatever string got passed in, that's what we're going to say is the new group to use. That looks pretty simple. So that's not too bad. Let's give it a shot. Okay, if that worked, we should be able to go over here and switch between the bears and enchanted. Cool. So yeah, we can load any group we want. Guess we're done. Thank you.